Chapter 13. The Silent Hunter. They didn't hear it coming. There was no crack of a twig, no rustle of leaves, not even the distant crunch of something stepping softly in the underbrush. Just silence. Deeper than quiet. Total absence. 3 tents, 5 campers, and 1 fire sputtering low beneath a night sky thick with stars. They had hiked 10 miles off the main road, following a rarely used trail into one of the last stretches of unspoiled forest in the state. No ranger stations, no nearby campsites, no cell service. Exactly what they were looking for. "We're probably the first people here in weeks," said Hayden, kicking back against a log. "Can you feel that? No cars, no voices, no light pollution, just us and the trees." "Careful what you wish for," said Morgan. "You're about to summon some cryptid." "You joke, but this is prime Jersey Devil real estate," Zach added, leaning over the fire with a grin. "Oh, please," said Clara, rolling her eyes. "The scariest thing in these woods is ticks." "I don't know," Lex chimed in, twisting the cap off a flask. "Something about it does feel off, like too quiet." The others laughed her off, but she wasn't wrong. The quiet here wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the world had sucked the air out of itself, like the forest was listening. They didn't notice it that night, not fully, but something did. Something that had already noticed them. By morning, Hayden was gone. At first, they assumed he had wandered off to pee, then to stretch his legs, then to mess with them. But after 20 minutes, the mood shifted. Lex called out into the trees. No answer. Clara walked the edge of camp, checking the creek, then the bushes. Nothing. No footprints. No trail. The dirt was untouched. Still, no one panicked. He had probably wandered off with his gear and just hadn't made it back yet. That assumption lasted until Zach unzipped Hayden's tent. His boots were still inside. So was his jacket, his flashlight, even his water bottle still half full, resting beside his sleeping bag. He hadn't taken anything with him. Why would he go barefoot? It was freezing last night, Morgan asked, demanding an answer from the trees. "Maybe sleepwalking?" Lex offered, though she didn't believe it even as she said it. They searched for hours. Nothing. Not a snapped branch, not a trail of disturbed leaves. No prints. Just silence. That night, the fire was smaller. No one spoke much. They sat close, shoulders nearly touching, eyes on the dark beyond the ring of flickering orange. Even the crickets had gone quiet. "Has anyone noticed how still it is?" Morgan whispered. "Like even the wind's afraid to move." Lex nodded. "I don't think we're alone." Zach turned to her, pale. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then looked around. "Don't freak out, but earlier when we were looking, I felt it, like something was watching me." "Where?" "Everywhere." Morgan gave a nervous laugh. "Creepy, but not super helpful." "I'm serious," Lex said. "I know it sounds paranoid, but it's like the forest was watching, like the trees were breathing." They stared at her. Then Clara stood up. "I'm not sitting here waiting for the next person to vanish. We should go back." Zach shook his head. "We can't hike out at night. We'd get turned around." Morgan added, "And Hayden could come back. If we're gone, he might get lost." "So what, we stay and hope whoever or whatever took him skips a turn?" Lex looked at the fire. "We stay together. Nobody goes off alone, not even for a second." They agreed. Zach stoked the fire again, and the silence deepened. Sometime past midnight, Lex's eyes snapped open. She didn't know why at first. No sound had woken her, no movement. She just knew something was wrong. Her tent was cold, too cold. Her breath fogged the nylon walls. She unzipped the flap carefully and peeked out. Morgan's tent was still across the clearing. Clara's too. Zach was sitting by the fire, poking at the embers with a stick. She called to him in a whisper. "Zach." He didn't turn. She stepped out. "Hey, what are you doing up?" Still nothing. She crossed the dirt quietly, heart thudding harder with every step, then stopped. Zach's hand was still, the stick unmoving. His face stared straight ahead, but he wasn't blinking. "Zach?" She reached out and touched his shoulder. Cold. Then his body slumped sideways. He'd been dead for hours. No wounds, no blood, just gone. Eyes open, skin pale, like something had turned him off. Lex screamed. They buried him just past the ridge, though they barely dug more than a foot. The ground was too hard. Clara cried. Morgan cursed. Lex didn't say much. They argued. Clara wanted to leave. Morgan insisted they wait till morning. Lex didn't care anymore. They'd already lost two. She didn't plan on losing herself next. They slept in shifts.
Fire stoked, weapons close, eyes wide. Still no sounds, still no tracks, still nothing. Just the overwhelming, almost crushing sense of being watched. In the early hours of the next morning, Clara's scream tore through the camp. Lex bolted up, stumbling out of the tent into gray fog. Morgan was gone. Clara stood near the fire, wild-eyed. "Where did he go? I was watching!" But no one had heard a thing. He'd vanished, like Hayden, like Zach. No scuffle, no shout, just missing. Lex ran to the edge of the camp. The trees loomed, silent and still. No birds, no insects, just damp air and something else, something waiting. "I'm done," Clara said. "We're leaving, now." Lex didn't argue. They packed fast. Every step through the forest felt wrong. The trail they'd hiked in on looked different now, twisted, deeper, the trees closer together. Twice they stopped to check direction. Once they found themselves back at camp. No explanation. They hadn't turned around. The forest had. By mid-afternoon, Clara was gone. 1 second she was right beside Lex, both moving slow, scanning the brush. The next, Lex turned to speak, and she was gone. No sound, no snap of twigs, just air. Lex stood frozen, alone. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She walked, no longer caring about direction. The silence followed her like a shadow, pressing close, muffling her thoughts. Her breath was too loud. Her footsteps felt like thunder. And somewhere in the trees behind her, something moved without making a sound. She didn't stop until nightfall. By then she had no idea where she was. No food, no water, just the weight of dread sinking into her spine. She collapsed under a thick pine, curling up against the trunk, trying not to shake. The stars blinked above, and the forest watched. She woke up with someone standing over her. For one breathless second, she thought it was Hayden. Then she realized this figure was too tall, too still, its head tilted in a slow, jerky motion. No face, no sound. Lex scrambled back, hands clawing at the dirt. The thing just stood there, watching, even though it had no eyes. Then it moved. Not walked, shifted. One moment it was standing, the next it was right in front of her. And Lex couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world folded inward, and the silence consumed her. Lex awoke in daylight, her eyes cracking open to a haze of gray-green above. Her limbs ached, her mouth was dry, and her neck was stiff from sleeping twisted beneath the pine. At first, she thought she had dreamed the creature, that her mind had conjured the faceless figure in the trees after too many nights of fear and not enough sleep. But then she sat up, and she saw the footprints. They were right beside her, embedded in the dirt. Not boot prints, not paws. Something flat and long, with too many toes, splayed and symmetrical like a crab or insect, but the size of a man's torso. 4 of them, in a perfect half-circle around where she had lain, as though something had stood above her in the night, watching her sleep, waiting. She stared at them for a long time before she moved. The silence pressed heavier now. Even the faint ambient noise of wind brushing leaves had disappeared. It wasn't that the forest was quiet, it was that everything else was gone, as if the creature's presence leached the very concept of sound from the world around it. Lex stood, shakily, and started walking. She no longer knew where she was or what direction she had come from. The sun was up, but the sky was a sheet of dull gray, the treetops weaving together into a thick canopy. Everything looked the same, a green maze with no exit and no path forward, but standing still felt like an invitation to die. After half an hour of walking, she came across something hanging from a branch. It was jacket, Hayden's jacket. She rushed to it and pulled it down, praying for something, blood, a note, anything that might explain where he had gone. Instead, a folded piece of skin fell from the sleeve. She didn't realize what it was at first. She picked it up, turned it over, and her stomach clenched. It was his face, peeled, hollow, flattened like wet leather. The eyes were gone. The skin was dry and crinkled, but she could see the stubble on the chin, the faint scar by the temple. It was unmistakable. She dropped it and stumbled backward, retching against a tree. The hunter hadn't just taken Hayden, it had emptied him. Lex wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The forest had become a labyrinth. Every tree looked familiar, every direction seemed to loop back into itself. She wiped her mouth and forced herself forward, fighting panic with every step. The deeper she went, the more wrong the forest became. Trees grew too close together, the trunks twisted unnaturally. Roots pulsed slightly under her feet, like they were breathing. She passed a circle of mushrooms growing in the shape of an open eye. The center was black earth, disturbed and damp, and something in her bones told her not to look too closely. Then she saw Morgan, or what was left of him. His body sat propped against a boulder, arms folded across his chest like he'd been posed. His face was gone, not just flayed like Hayden, gone, like it had been scooped clean with surgical precision. In its place was a flat sheet of bark, carefully pressed over the skull, as if the forest had tried to give him a new mask.
His rib cage had been split open, clean and wide like a book. Each rib was curled outward and woven through with vines. His insides were missing. Lex collapsed to her knees, sobbing quietly, pressing both hands to her mouth to keep from making a sound. She had the horrible sense that any noise would draw the thing back to her, that it was still nearby, that it was always nearby. She forced herself to crawl past Morgan's corpse, keeping low, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't want to die like that. Unmade, displayed. She needed to hide. She moved for what felt like hours, deeper into the thickets, where the trees grew too tight for anything large to move freely. Her hands were scraped raw, her jeans torn, her hair tangled with pine needles and burrs. Her feet bled with each step, the blisters split open from wet socks and constant walking. Then she found the stone wall. It rose from the ground with no context, just a vertical slab of moss-covered rocks set between the trees. It was ancient, cracked in places, but mostly intact. Faint etchings covered its surface, lines, spirals, what might have been letters before time wore them away. And beneath it, an opening. Just a slit between 2 slabs of rock, no taller than her chest. A crawl space, a crevice. Without thinking, she dropped to her stomach and slid inside. The interior was cold, dry, narrow enough to pinch her shoulders. She dragged herself deeper, the tightness of the rock scraping her ribs, her palms slapping stone. After 20 feet, the tunnel widened slightly, just enough to sit curled and still. She lay there in the dark, her chest heaving, heart hammering so loud she was certain it would echo through the walls. Then she realized something. She could hear again. Not the forest, not birds, not wind, but her own heartbeat, the rush of her blood in her ears, the scratch of her fingernails against stone. The silence didn't reach here. It was like the cave was outside the creature's reach. She slept or passed out. Either way, when she woke, her arms were numb and her throat was dry as dust. She had no way of knowing how long she'd been down there. The light from the entrance was faint, greenish with lichen glow. She considered staying, just letting herself starve, letting it be over. But something in her refused. She wouldn't die like prey. When she finally crawled out, the forest was waiting, quiet again. Too quiet. But this time, the silence felt anticipatory, like the hunter knew where she had gone, and was now curious. She stood, legs shaky, and looked around. Then her eyes locked onto something new. Clara's boots. They stood upright in the middle of a clearing, untouched, laces still tied. No Clara, no body, just a pool of clear liquid beneath them, seeping into the moss. Lex approached slowly. She could smell it before she saw it properly. Not blood, sap. Something between wood and meat, sweet but wrong. The boots were empty. She picked one up. Inside was a thin lining of pale, translucent material. Clara had been digested, dissolved from the inside out. She dropped the boot and backed away. And that's when the forest shifted. Branches above trembled. The air dropped 10 degrees, and Lex heard the first sound she'd heard in days. A breath. Long, drawn in, from behind her. She turned. It stood at the far edge of the clearing, taller than she remembered. Its head scraped the lower branches. Its body still resembled a man, but only vaguely. It had no skin, just bark and muscle. Its chest rose and fell in silence. Its hands had fingers that split at the knuckle, forming 2, then 4, then 8. Its face was a blank slate, no features, just a flat surface that pulsed faintly like the inside of a drum. Lex ran. She didn't think, didn't plan, just sprinted. Behind her, the silence followed. Not the creature's footfalls, there were none, but the way the world closed behind her. The forest stopped making noise in its wake. She tripped once, caught herself on a branch, kept moving. She could feel it gaining, not in footsteps, but in stillness. The world narrowed. Then she saw it. A road, just 30 yards ahead through the trees. She poured everything she had into those final steps, lungs burning, heart exploding. Behind her, the breath came again. Slow, heavy. The road was closer now, 10 feet. She dove for it. The world blinked. She hit gravel, rolled hard, and came to a stop on the shoulder of an empty dirt road. Silence. Then a bird called, a crow. Somewhere leaves rustled. The real world had returned. She turned back to the forest. It was just trees now, empty, ordinary, but something in the shadows still watched. She could feel it. The silence was still with her, in the back of her mind, in the gaps between her heartbeat, waiting, always waiting. Lex didn't move for a long time. She lay on the gravel shoulder of the road, her knees scraped, her hands trembling. A car could have passed by, or a ranger, or nothing at all, and she wouldn't have noticed. All she could hear now was her breath, loud and fast, and the steady drumming of her pulse in her skull. For the first time in what felt like days, the air had weight again. The birdsong in the distance was jarring. Every rustle of leaves startled her. She was out. She was safe. She had made it. She repeated that in her head like a mantra, trying to believe it. But it didn't feel true. Some part of her knew she wasn't done. That thing, the hunter, wasn't a forest creature in the normal sense. It didn't care about boundaries or maps. It wasn't tied to roots and bark. It had tasted her fear. It had studied her in silence. It had let her go. That was the worst part. It had let her go. A ranger found her 3 hours later, still sitting by the roadside with blood-caked fingers and dirt on her face. She couldn't speak at first, not until they wrapped her in a blanket and brought her to the station, where she sat beside a humming vending machine and tried to find the right words. She gave them names, descriptions, showed them the scratches, the bruises, the shallow cuts on her legs. They nodded, took notes, and filed a report. Then they asked what happened. She tried to explain. The silence, the hunter, the vanishing. How one by one her friends had disappeared without a trace, without a sound, until she was alone and hunted by a creature that didn't walk. It waited. The officers exchanged looks. "We've had campers go missing before," one of them said gently. "Nothing recently, though." She told them to search deeper, past the known trails, past the ridge. She even drew them a map from memory, marking the cave and the place where Morgan had been posed like a puppet. She expected skepticism. Instead, the ranger nodded quietly and folded the map. "Thank you." Nothing more. No shock, no disbelief. Just acknowledgement. That chilled her more than the forest had. They took her to a hospital for observation. Dehydration, exhaustion, a gash on her ankle had gotten infected. She spent 2 nights there, refusing to close her eyes. Every time she did, she saw its face. Not a face, really, just a void where a face should have been, pulsing with thought, with intelligence. On the 3rd night, she dreamed she was still in the woods. The silence pressed in from all sides. But this time, when she turned, the hunter wasn't in the trees. It stood in her room, at the foot of her bed, watching, waiting. Lex moved to the city. She didn't go back to school, didn't return home. She took a small apartment in a loud neighborhood. Sirens, traffic, music, always something to fill the air. The city was alive with noise, a barrier she could build between herself and what she had survived. For weeks she didn't tell anyone what had really happened. She attended 2 funerals. Hayden's parents asked questions she couldn't answer. Clara's mother cried into her shoulder. She stood in the back at Morgan's service, hands shaking, and slipped out before anyone could recognize her. She kept waiting for the silence to return. And eventually, it did. It started with the apartment's clock. It stopped ticking. Then the pipes stopped groaning at night. The fridge made no hum. Her phone no longer buzzed when receiving notifications. It just lit up, soundlessly. She took it to a repair shop. They said it worked fine. One night, she turned on the television, and every character's mouth moved without sound. She checked the volume, checked the cables. No use. The silence was coming back. Not everywhere, just around her. It followed her into the elevator at work, where the fluorescent lights flickered silently. Into the subway car, where the screech of metal on metal muted the moment she stepped aboard. People spoke around her, but their words came slower, as if through cotton. The silence wasn't ambient anymore. It was personal, targeted, growing. She tried noise machines, speakers, crowds. Nothing helped. Wherever she went, the world quieted. And then, one morning, she found a footprint on her apartment floor. Not a boot, not bare skin, something flat, symmetrical, splayed wide. The floorboards were unmarked otherwise, no open windows, no broken locks, just the print right by her bed. She scrubbed it, moved out 2 days later, but it didn't matter, because the hunter wasn't tied to the woods, it was tied to her. Lex stopped sleeping. When she finally passed out from exhaustion, she dreamed of a hospital room again. But this time, she wasn't in the bed. She was in the cave. She was on her back, staring up at tree roots tangled like veins across the ceiling. And above her, the hunter knelt, carving her face into its bark skin with a clawed finger, slowly, lovingly. When she woke up, she ran to the bathroom and found a symbol drawn on her mirror in condensation. Not a word, not a letter, a spiral, just like the ones etched in the stone cave walls. The silence worsened. She could no longer hear her own breathing. She banged pans together. Nothing. Broke glass. One day she stepped out into the street screaming for help. No one looked. No one heard. She ran to a police station and pounded the counter. No one turned. No one saw her. She was still there, but the world had stopped perceiving her. As if the hunter wasn't just stalking her body, it was unraveling her from reality, thread by thread. The apartment decayed around her. Mold spread across the walls. Her plants withered. The lights flickered out one by one. But the silence never stopped. Until it did. Until everything stopped. She woke one final time in the middle of the night and realized there was no more heartbeat, no breath, no air, nothing. She couldn't move. She was aware, trapped, suspended in total sensory isolation. And in the corner of her vision, a shape moved, slowly, patiently. The hunter approached, dragging her last moment of perception out like an endless string. She couldn't scream, couldn't run, couldn't close her eyes, only watched as it came close and wrapped its long fingers around her skull. And finally, after so much waiting, it took her. Not with violence, with silence. An acquaintance found her apartment a week later. The door was still locked, windows unbroken, but everything inside was wilted, like it hadn't been untouched for years. The furniture was sun-bleached and crumbling. The air was heavy with mildew. A dead phone sat beside a dusty mattress. There was no body, no bones, only a single footprint in the center of the room, wide, inhuman. And on the far wall, scrawled in mold, a message. No letters, just a spiral. They say the hunter doesn't kill the way other things do. It consumes time, consumes memory, and once it marks you, there's no going back. You might leave the forest, you might run 1,000 miles, but one day you'll turn around, and you'll realize the world has stopped listening, that the silence has caught up, that you're already gone. You just haven't finished disappearing yet.
Thank you for listening to this story. Your support means a lot and helps keep these tales coming. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to subscribe and follow for more dark and immersive stories just like this one. New horrors await. Don't miss what's coming next.